Next up, we are so excited to be hosting Abbey from Radicle. She's going to be talking about building decentralized code and collaboration on Ethereum. Abbey, how are you?
Good. How are you today, Shannon?
Awesome. We're stoked to have you. You ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Take it away.
Great. Great to meet everybody. Everybody who's watching. Love ETHDenver. Really missing it. The annual trek to Colorado this year. So sending good vibes through the internet. But cool, I'm here. My name is Abby. I'm here to talk to everybody about the project that I'm building called Radicle. So before I get into Radicle, which is a decentralized network for code collaboration, I want to talk quickly about Ethereum. So the reason we're all here is to talk about Ethereum. And we all really love Ethereum for a lot of reasons, but mainly because it's becoming a really big part of this thing that we call, Web3. You can call Web3 a framework, a concept, a religion, I don't know. But in my opinion, I think Web3 really represents this important transition from an internet controlled by centralized platforms to an internet powered by decentralized protocols. It's also an industry and a space that is entirely online, values total decentralization, and is completely open source, which I think is one of the more powerful things about Web3. We're building software that is decentralizing, but is also decentralized itself in its open source nature and in kind of like the values that are embedded in people that are in the ecosystem. So this is also really cool. However, we on the Radicle team think that there's kind of an elephant in the room, which is really around code collaboration. So the way that we build this software. And there's just this big kind of glaring hole in that the hosting, sharing, collaboration, and distribution of the software that we're building to bring about Web3's very existence is very centralized. It's centralized to platforms on the web that have a same hold on the developer ecosystem that Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon, and these other big tech companies have on our day-to-day lives. So before we tackle how Radicle is, trying to be an alternative to this centralized code collaboration, maybe you're wondering, what is the problem with centralized code collaboration? And I feel like I have to say it every single time I talk about Radicle, but GitHub is really great. GitHub is one of these centralized platforms for collaborating on code, and we love it. And we really mean it when we say that GitHub has played an extremely important role in the growth of the open source ecosystem. And it's played a really big role in a lot of our lives. And this is because it's basically created a global social network of developers, of people building code. And it's developed this rich platform that has defined new workflows that have completely revolutionized how we build software together. And it's also built by nerds who care about open source. I realize my slides are maybe a little bit, I guess my slides are a little bit wonky, so I hope that the lag catches up from my screen. I can share these online for other people as well. But basically, GitHub's really great. It's built by people that we respect and share our values. But at the end of the day, it's also a walled garden that's built on open soil, just like everything else, right? So GitHub is built on top of Git, which is a free and open source distributed version control system. And so very similar to the other platforms that we, Web3 pioneers of the Ethereum ecosystem, are trying to dismantle and divest from: Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Google. And we've seen this similar trend in the re-centralization of the open protocols of the web that we've seen with the open protocols that back code collaboration. And the main outstanding factor is that it's controlled by one corporation, in that GitHub is owned and controlled by Microsoft. So that being said, there's pros and cons to the situation, but just like we've seen in the other social platforms, we've started to see the side effects of this centralization. We've seen the corporate influence of Microsoft and other global social platforms creep into everyday news, whether it be banning developers from US sanctioned countries, buckling under government pressure to shut down disruptive software, or censoring code due to external influences. For example, the RIAA's recent attack on the open source software repository of the YouTube downloader. And so now we start to see the cracks begin to show, just like we've seen in Twitter with everything that's happened with the most recent election. A lot's starting to happen, and we're starting to see our centralized code collaboration platforms start to crack under the pressure, the societal pressure, and the technical pressure that comes with being one of the biggest global hubs for collaborating and building open source software. So despite all of these examples, which kind of makes up like the ideological argument for decentralizing code collaboration, we think that the call to decentralized code collaboration isn't just based off of values, because again, GitHub works for a lot of people. We even use it, and proposing an alternative based purely on ideology alone disregards the reason that these platforms became so important in the first place. But there are real problems with centralized hosting platforms. And the first of these is the inherent platform risk that comes with any corporate-owned platform. This subjects its users to censorship, and usually will be continuously subjected to and overtaken by capitalist means and extraction, which are often misaligned with the goals of free and open source communities. Second, there's a real security risk. Central platforms are single points of failure and provide many real attack vectors that are, again, as the repository of code grows on GitHub, only becomes more apparent and only becomes more of an attack vector as centralized platforms struggle to keep up as technology advances. Finally, which I think is the biggest one, is vendor lock-in. So all non-Git native features like issues, comments, reviews, and PRs are entirely hosted on GitHub. Everyone says, well, Git is decentralized, so it's fine. That's my backup. That's where my code is. But what would you do if you lost all of your issues, the conversations, the discussions, the contributions that were made or not made to a repository? Most of the collaboration layer would be stripped away, leaving only the change history of the code. So basically, you'd have the code, but you wouldn't have the collaboration. And along that lines, the social network of GitHub is entirely unique to and hosted by GitHub. Our developer identity is defined by social connections that are made through these centralized platforms. It's not sovereign to us, just in the same way that you don't own your Twitter profile. And more we start seeing that online identities are real identities. And it makes people uncomfortable that all of our social relationships, stars, likes, follows, that define our reputation, define our identity, exist solely within these platforms. So proposing an alternative to hosted platforms based off of these issues, is more relevant because we're starting to see these issues show through the cracks. But as software development continues to grow at the rapid pace that it's growing today, and with the nature of the digital ecosystem shifting and turning as it encompasses more and more and more of the world, we'll see these small problems, these edge cases, soon become critical points of failure, if not solved or addressed. And this is hyper relevant for the Web3 space, because in a world where nearly all software relies on open source code and our entire ecosystem depends on open source code, maintaining the resilience and the health of our free and open source ecosystems is more important than ever. The issues with hosted platforms can't be ignored. Our dependence on these centrally hosted platforms in, specifically our space for the distribution of our infrastructure is inherently unsustainable. And there must be like an intentional shift in narrative to prioritize the adoption and the exploration and the experimentation with decentralized alternatives for code collaboration that abide by the principles of free and open source software and also of Web3. And so that's kind of the setting for why we built Radicle. Radicle is meant to be an alternative that can step in and start supporting the Web3 ecosystem as it grows by providing resilient code collaboration infrastructure. So Radicle is an open garden, hence the name, which is a botanical term. It's powered by a peer-to-peer gossip protocol that's built on top of Git and is complemented by an opt-in Ethereum integration. So this means that there's no central servers, no corporations owning the network, and no censorship. Radicle isn't owned by anybody. It's a completely free and open network. In comparison to other decentralized code collaboration alternatives as well, there's no hassle setting up like self-hosted instances that are isolated from each other because everything's based in this one network. It's also collaborating peer-to-peer also means working securely offline. So with Radicle, everything's local first. So this means that all of these non-Git native artifacts that are currently locked into centralized platforms and unique to them are brought back to the developer's domain. They're brought back to their machine. So they're always available offline and constructed as artifacts on the protocol layer that can be signed, gossiped, and controlled by the person who's contributing and creating those artifacts, which is a really powerful concept. And secondly, everything's built on public key cryptography. So all of these artifacts are cryptographically signed, adding this whole new layer to security that just really can't be accessed by centralized platforms right now. So this means in addition to your identities that are linked to your device, your code will be backed by cryptographic signatures that go beyond, your current keys that you use, and adding this really important layer of security to day-to-day code collaboration interactions. And then finally, you can really own your own infrastructure. Radicle will be free and completely open source forever. It's a technically, politically, and economically resilient infrastructure for developing software together. And it's available to you no matter where you are. And since it's open source, it's forkable, it's customizable, it's hackable, which means that down the line, you'll be able to build your own experience. And that whatever we build for Radicle is really just setting the stage for what others will build on Radicle and for Radicle in the future. So our team has contributed to the Radicle network by building, one of the first truly decentralized desktop clients for code collaboration that we call Upstream. We personally believe that building functional, usable, and beautiful experiences for developers and users of decentralized technologies is essential when challenging any status quo. So while we envision this application to be the main way that users interact with Radicle, it will not be the only way. Upstream, as with the Radicle protocols, is completely open source and forkable, giving anybody in the space the ability to develop their own code collaboration experience and have complete freedom when experiencing and interacting with the Radicle network. So since we are at, can't see the slide, I guess it's a little bit glitchy, but this says where does Ethereum come in? We are at ETHDenver, and one of the really exciting parts about Radicle, despite everything that I also just told you, is how we're integrating with Ethereum. So let's walk through some of the things that we're going to be building with our Ethereum integration. So first, the whole point of the Ethereum integration is to complement the peer-to-peer network. So this integration is an opt-in feature layer, you may call it, that gives users the ability to interact with, different experiences that may enhance, their current code collaboration day to day. And with Ethereum, this also gives people in the Ethereum ecosystem a way of creating, having a global, relevance on the Radicle network. So with Ethereum comes a global namespace, which gives Radicle the ability to access these global network effects of centralized platforms without taking on the platform risk. And so we're able to do this with our ENS integration. So Radicle users will be able to claim global names and use them to be identified and discovered on the network. And this is a huge part of solving discoverability in peer-to-peer networks. It's really hard to build in great discoverability, or at least discoverability that rivals the global search bars that we have in our platform conglomerates. But this is a first step to doing that. By being able to claim global names and attest Ethereum addresses, Ethereum identities to Radicle profiles on the peer-to-peer layer, you'll be able to use wallets and addresses in your Radicle experience. And this will be a way for users to recognize you not only on the Radicle network, but within the global Ethereum network. So these names are kind of like an application agnostic and self-sovereign alternative to a GitHub profile, which is relevant to unlocking, our developer identity, the one that really exists in the interactions in which we share our GitHub profile to determine reputation or what we're working on. So that's a pretty powerful concept, but this really powers up some of the other, user features that really get us excited. The first of those being orgs. So easily managing a group of repositories with organizations have become a commonplace feature of our day-to-day code collaboration experience. Unfortunately, when restrained by the social model of centralized orgs, centralized platforms, and the orgs that are built into those platforms, running organizations on these platforms comes with some limitations. These limitations are basically forced on you by this admin-based model of centralized platforms that are where a single user has privileged access over the organization and its members. And this is really limiting to projects and collectives that operate within non-hierarchical structures. It also poses challenges around trust, especially for communities, protocols, DAOs, that are mainly organized over the internet. So this is where Radicle orgs comes in. On Radicle, organizations are powered by smart contracts instead of dependent on admins. These contracts allow you to define the rules and permissions for code bases in a completely trustless manner. So with orgs, DAOs, decentralized organizations, internet communities, squads, collectives, can access a new superpower where everything, membership, admin control, governance, canonical project state, source code, and the code collaboration that goes into that organization is truly decentralized. And so this is taking ownership, and this is a really powerful concept, taking ownership of the asset, which is your code base, and returning it to control of a group of individuals and giving them the ability to program that control and program that ownership in a way that's secure and trustless and not reliant on a centralized platform or service. So that's where orgs comes in. And this is going to be one of the big features that we're launching as soon as we start rolling out our Ethereum features. And the second is something called Radicle funding. And so the concept of Radicle funding comes from the belief that sustainability goes beyond technical resilience. So to truly free developers from centralized code collaboration, we need to build better solutions for empowering the financial freedom of open source maintainers and developers. And so this concept is enhanced by DeFi, right? DeFi is doing the same.
We had a little bit of a glitch with Abby. We hope that she's about to come back to us. Maybe she can do a quick refresh, but she's been talking to us about decentralized building and decentralized funding for open source platforms and how that ties into the Ethereum protocol. So we're gonna just see if Abby can rejoin us. Hopefully she unfreezes soon. But since she was close to the end of her presentation, we're gonna wrap it up and we're gonna head over to Willie.